So Sue, welcome to our club. We appreciate your time today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a retired teacher, educator, and I've been active with genealogy probably about 25 years now, although I did work with my mom back in the 70s, but I was not that interested. And of course, the technology wasn't available at that time. And I decided to combine my love of teaching with genealogy. It's fun to have students who actually pay attention and behave themselves during this presentations, as opposed to middle school students. Okay. Here's some advice for you to save you some money. And Mark Twain said it best. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Why waste your money going looking up your family tree when you could go into politics and your opponents would do it for you? Save you not only some money, but a lot of time, because I will warn you that if you decide to take up this hobby, it's very addictive. And you'll sit down and think, I'm going to spend 15 minutes solving this issue, and 3 hours later, you're still staring at the screen. What I'm going to talk about is how to get started. I'm definitely going to recommend that you use software. The library will be your friend. Libraries have in-person as well as online resources that you need to be taking advantage of. You're probably going to start with census records, so I'll talk about that. And there's a lot of free stuff out there on the internet, which you can take advantage of. And there's also a way that your computer club can help you, at least ours is doing that. And I'm also going to encourage you to use social media, which can connect you with people who are interested in genealogy and people who are not interested in genealogy, but maybe sitting on family pictures for you. This picture was taken in 1947. I'm that little girl. Everybody else, of course, in that picture is gone. It's my mom, my great-grandmother, and my grandmother. The longer you wait, the more that's going to be lost. It's either going to be on purpose or accidentally, or people do not realize what they have. And the most important thing, I think, is that people pass away and their stories are gone. When you're a kid or you're younger, you're not interested in hearing those stories, and then suddenly the people that knew those stories are gone when you're interested. So even if you think you're not interested in pursuing this as a hobby, you could help family genealogist out, or somebody that may become interested in the future, by organizing what you have. You have pictures, you may have some vital records, documents, and you want to identify all the women by their birth names. It gets too confusing, and you may not even know about marriages that have occurred after you have a name. So always use that maiden name for your women. You're going to start probably your research with the census once you decide to get out there beyond what you have. And always remember the bigger historical picture, because it plays into who married whom, plays into where people end up living, jobs that they had. And I will tell you something that'll make you very sad, is you can find mistakes even on primary records. So, everything that's out there is not correct. I know you'll be shocked to learn that what's on the internet isn't 100% accurate. But even in documents that were supposedly correct, you can find mistakes. So organize what you have. Pictures, label the pictures. I have pictures of myself arm in arm with somebody who was obviously a friend, and I have no idea who that person was. And it happens. Whatever you have, label it. But I have some sad news for you. Your kids don't want your stuff. So I recommend digitizing as much as possible, because some of those physical things that you have are going to disappear. The computer things, the digitized things, are more likely to stay around. You actually put your family tree online, or you can use software. I, of course, recommend many places because uh, it's easy for something to get destroyed in one location. If you have it in multiple places, you'll have it. I want to address the issue of software, and not to be a doomsayer, but there's a problem with not making the right decision at the outset. And what happens with the software is you can always save names, dates, places, notes. But those source files that you've been gathering, all the media files, census records, pictures, whatever, they do not transition to a new software package. So it's not impossible, but it's sure a lot of work to transfer from one software package to another. Audio files don't transfer either. So all information transfers in what's called a GEDCOM format. I had an explanation about GEDCOM. And what GEDCOMS is the universal talking language of genealogy software. It's like an RTF is to a word processing document. So it allows one software to speak to another, but it only will transfer names, dates, notes, places. It'll transfer the sources, in other words, the documentation you have for the source, but it will not transfer the media or source files that you have attached. So I use Family Tree Maker. It is the Cadillac of the software packages out there. It syncs with Ancestry, and what this means, and what I really like about the newer packages now, I've used this software since 1995. It's had a lot of iterations. It used to be owned by Ancestry. It was owned by Broaderband before that, but it's now owned by someone else. And they have a pretty good chat function. You can't talk to somebody on the phone, but they will solve your issues on the chat. But you're not going to find that software anywhere for free. You're going to have to pay for it. It runs about $80 for the download. As far as I'm concerned, it's worth every penny of it. Roots Magic also syncs with Ancestry, and it does have a free starter version. And by using the sync function, you could actually go from Roots Magic to Family Tree Maker, because you can sync your tree on Ancestry, and then you can pull it up into the software that way. Legacy syncs with MyHeritage. Very nice piece of software. Does have a free starter version, but if you're going to subscribe to Ancestry, you don't want to use Legacy. If you're going to subscribe to MyHeritage instead, then you might want to consider using Legacy. And I do have friends who use Legacy. I used to do both, but it's been years now since I've used the Legacy software. Well, I see I have this slide out of sequence, so I think I told you all of that. So how are you going to get started? You're going to start at what you know. I hope you know your own name, when you were born, where you were born, that kind of thing. And then your parents, and if you're lucky enough to still have them around, maybe you can get some information from them, and your grandparents, whatever you know. If you have any documents that you have, be sure to indicate what it is. If you've got letters, you want to write who wrote it, where to, the date. If you have the envelope, keep the envelope. But a lot of letters say, "Dear Dad," and they might say, "Love your son." You need to identify who those people are, because the next generation is not going to know. My cousin recently gave me a big stack of pictures, and we're obviously only related on one side. It's my mother and her father. And so she had pictures that were from the other side of the family. And she had one that was written to Grandma, but it was a postcard with a picture on the back. So I'm going to identify this picture. And so I had, it was signed, "Your granddaughter, Teresa." Luckily, it was signed that way, because otherwise I wouldn't have known the relationship. And then Grandma's address and name was on the other side. It was the husband's name. It was from 1910. So I had to go, and the next generation on my cousin's mother's side to get it, but I eventually figured it out. I wasn't quit until I figured that one out. Make sure you're typing things in correctly, accurately. Most things that you're going to find on the internet have been transcribed. Do not believe the transcriptions. They may be incorrect, so I want you to always look at the original document. And I will say this a half a dozen times probably over the course of this presentation. You always want to save your originals, and you want to attach them to the people. Now, luckily, the software does this for you, for those of us who are kind of lazy. It not only sucks up the documents and attaches it, but it also then writes what the document is, like the 1920 census, and where you can find it online. So that works great to make sure that everything is sourced. And as I said, I recommend you digitize everything you have, but if you're getting it from the internet, obviously it's going to be digitized. Family stories can be so rich with information and making people real. If you're lucky enough to have older family members, get them talking, use your phone, use a recorder, interview them, have them tell their stories. You can not only write it down, but you can record their voices. You can attach those audio files to the software. And then you can use historical records to verify the accuracy, because everybody has family stories that have been embellished over the years and may or may not be accurate. My mother, God bless her, she could cut a newspaper article out so that there would be no white space around it. I will tell you. And then she'd write 11/9/09. Okay, was that the date of the death? Was that the date of the newspaper? What newspaper did it come from? So she had her great-grandfather's obituary trimmed in the paper, trimmed, so I had no idea what newspaper it was from. There was no date on that baby. And guess what? There was an incorrect tombstone, which I'll tell you about later. And the tombstone was incorrect for the death date, not the birth date. Pictures, you want to identify who is in the picture, when it was taken, where it was taken. I mentioned about the letters before. If you are lucky enough to have family Bibles, you need to write down the provenance. How did it come into your hands? Who had it? What, and you need the title page. If you decide you're not keeping the whole Bible, and you take those pages, there a lot of times they're in the middle of the Bible between the Old and the New Testament, with the marriages and the births and the deaths. You need to save the title page also. And any stories that you have, if you're recording them, just introduce the person who's telling the story, when you're talking to them, where you're talking to them, and then what the story's about, and he or she can tell you the dates that she's talking about. But remember, you think you're going to remember everything. Well, first of all, once you start working on those family trees, and I have my parents in 2 separate trees, I have 8,000 people in each of those trees. Now, it's not that I have so many, ancestors going back 72 generations, but I get sidetracked with interesting stories and somebody I can't find, and then I have to track him down, and then he had children, and it goes on and on. So remember that these records that I'm going to tell you about were not made for you to do genealogy. So even though you can use them for genealogy, they're missing things sometimes, and it's very frustrating. But here's what you can use. Census records are good. Military records are not as good because, except for the draft registration, they don't have a birth date on them. A lot of the information is muster rolls. So where somebody was at a certain time. But the richest part of military records are the pension records. Because if I wanted to draw a pension on my husband, I had to prove we were married. And if I was going to get benefits for the children, I have to prove that they were born. So the pension records, I always tell people to follow the money. The pension records can be your best sources for genealogical purposes. Immigration and naturalization can be very helpful, but remember, before 1926, if a wife was naturalized, she was only naturalized with her husband, so not in her own name. The name is listed on his naturalization papers, but you can't search for her to find her naturalization records because it only came on the husband's record. Birth records. Most states did not start keeping birth records at the state level until the beginning of the 1900s. Marriage records, probably about 1885. That's pretty much across the board with all states. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to find them, but that's when they first started, the states started to ask for birth and death records. People didn't understand that they had to report things. If grandpa died, they just buried him in the back 40 and that was it. And they weren't in the mode of getting records to anybody. So you will find that the early birth and death records are incomplete. You may not be able to find them. So church records can be good because most people in the 1800s, 1700s, early 1900s had some kind of church affiliation, and births, marriages, and deaths, they used the church facilities and they were reported. Now, if you're Presbyterian, Lutheran, Catholic, you're going to find good records, pretty complete records. If you're looking for Methodist records, I feel sorry for you. The Methodist preachers were itinerant. That meant that they sometimes didn't come around for, except every 3-4 months. And that's why you will find in a lot of Methodist records that the marriages occurred after people had set up housekeeping. They didn't want to wait 6 months till the preacher came around. So you will find that there may be a very short time before the first baby is born. Family Bibles are good, but always look at that title page, because if you got a 1950 Bible that talks about 1800 records, that may not be accurate. Newspapers can be very rich with information because everything went into the newspaper back in the day. And that was even into the 60s and the 70s, where there were columns that just told about what was happening around the neighborhood. And, even the deaths might be in that kind of column rather than on an obituary. And city directories are great to see where somebody lived, who was in the household, and that would only be other adults. They didn't list children in city directories, but also it lists the job, the occupation, and then where the person was employed, so you can watch somebody move up the corporate ladder, or what they did, and determine economics. And people generally lived close to, they stayed friends with the people around whom they lived. And if they were ethnic, newly arrived in the country, they often had an ethnic community and they married within that community, and those were their friends. Just for your information, censuses do not become public record, and this is by law, until 72 years after the census. Now, the census date was not always April 1st, but arbitrarily they have decided that the release of new censuses will be on April 1st of the year 72 years later. So the 1950 census was released on April 1st of this year, and everything at the beginning was all indexed by artificial intelligence, which amazingly was fairly accurate. But of course, it depended on how clear the handwriting of the census taker was. Then the things that are below here are the genealogical standards. There's no law. It varies from state to state. Death certificates become public record after 50 years by the generally accepted genealogical standard, and birth certificates 105 years. This does not mean that you're going to find these things on the internet. It just means that that's a generally accepted standard and not all states adhere to them. However, marriage records and wills and probates, wills are only public record after they become probated. You can't go down, they're not registered at the courthouse until they go to probate. Even if somebody says they do not want the marriage information put in the newspaper, it's still public record. So you could go down to the courthouse and look at it. I mentioned that I was going to talk about libraries. I have a lifelong love of libraries, and they haven't failed me in my genealogical pursuit. You want to look on the website of the where your ancestors settled, and they may have newspaper resources. They may have obituaries. We have a local library here in Union City, Pennsylvania, that has cemetery indexes. I found marriage records on indexes on them. So it varies. Penn State University is trying to digitize Pennsylvania newspapers. So that's on their site, but they're located in Center County, Pennsylvania. And they started with the Center County newspaper and the obituaries. And you can search that even by maiden name. It's great. And it goes right up to present day. But the resources vary from place to place. They all will have some kind of genealogical links. They may have resources that are online that they pay for, in which case they may be for patrons only. In other words, you have to have a library card from that library, although Pennsylvania has a thing called PA Access that most public libraries are members of, and you can access other libraries with that PA Access card. I don't know how other states do that. Call the library. They may have a genealogy room, and they may even have somebody who works there who knows a little bit about what's going on. And that person may have family files where he or she has gotten calls over the years and has a file cabinet with stuff that's been found on this family. So it's always worth a phone call. We have a library here in Crawford County that the genealogy room is only open when there's a volunteer in there working, and the local historical society, genealogical society, offers a volunteer to come in there to help out. And now sometimes you'll get the person that's in the genealogy room, they're under duress, if you will. They don't even know how to turn on the microphone. But libraries are getting a little better about that. So what might you find at a library? They usually have online or in-house subscriptions. Our library recently added a news bank subscription, and they purchased the Erie newspaper back to 1884 and has that online for you. So you don't have to go in and use a microfilm anymore. Most of them have in-house newspapers on microfilm. Most of them are now running their microfilm through computers, so it's a lot easier to do a screenshot and save it. You always carry a flash drive, and because you can plug it right in the computer and you can save the document as a PDF and you have your own copy. I never minded paying. Our library charged 10 cents a copy. I mean, that's nothing. But then I had to go home and digitize it myself. So if it's already digitized, it's a piece of cake. They may have special local indexes. I mentioned about marriage records, obituaries, whatever. Remember, if they have an obituary index, that's not going to be the death date. That's going to be the date the obituary was in the newspaper. And newspapers used to get the obituaries in the newspaper very quickly, sometimes even same day. But now more and more memorial services are being held, and sometimes, well, especially during COVID, they might wait for if it's an elderly person, they might wait for the spouse to die before they have a memorial service. So the date that the obituary is in the newspaper may bear no relationship to the date of death. So always look at the obituary itself to get the information. And fewer obituaries are having birth dates in them now. It's a privacy issue kind of thing. I always recommend that when you start your search, look for the surname only, unless it's something like Smith or Jones, because you're going to find siblings and married names in that index that you're looking at, and ones you may not have known about before. So I always start my search with a surname only. I mentioned before about primary sources. I want to make sure you know what I'm talking about. Primary sources are created at the time of the event. So any record that you have that talks about something, the closer it is to the actual time, it's more likely to be correct. And I'm going to give you an example. My great-great-grandfather, every record that I have, he was born in 1859, but every record that I have, his death certificate, his obituary, his marriage record, everything, says he was born in 1860. He did not know when he was born. In fact, on his marriage record, actually, it says when it asks for date of birth, he writes, don't know. He wrote, don't know. He was born on September 17th. He knew that. The 1860 census was dated September 3rd. He is in it and listed as 1 year old. So I know he was born in 1859, but he did not know that. So all of those records that I would normally use, his tombstone, his, a death certificate, the obituary, are incorrect. So a secondary source is created after the event. Now that doesn't mean that the secondary source is wrong, but it could be wrong. It was created sometime after the event. It wasn't that important for people back in the day to remember what year they were born in. And that's why you see a difference on the World War I draft registration and the World War II. They just weren't sure what year they were born. They weren't trying to lie. That's just the way things were then. So use your secondary sources to get you going, but research it and try and figure out if it's actually accurate. So census records are primary, but unfortunately the census records don't ask when you were born, and that's with the exception of the 1900 census. They ask how old you are. So the date of the census, the actual physical month and day, are going to be important for that, because you're in 1 year you could be 2 different ages depending on the date. Immigration records can be primary. Death certificates are primary for the death, not the birth, because you're getting the birth information from people who may or may not know. Always look at the name of the informant on a death certificate, because that will help you determine how accurate it is. If your ancestor died in an institution and that's where they got the information from the administrator there, it's less likely to be accurate than if the wife or husband gave it. The children are less likely to get it right than the spouse. The spouse is more likely to know the right year. Birth certificates are accurate for birth, and then they should be, the mother and father should know where they were born, so they can, that should be accurate. Remember though that our boundaries have changed, well, even for states, but county boundaries have changed. So you need to find out what county it is now, what county it was then, because the records may not be where you think they're going to be. And military records, that includes draft registration. I mentioned how much better pension records are for genealogical information. Muster rolls, just going to tell you where and when somebody was somewhere in the service. But bounty land records for the Civil War and the Revolutionary War can be offer you some good information, because either the person himself got the land, or it was passed on to one of his children, or his wife or his children, or multiple children. The church and Bible records, I mentioned about the problem with Bible records, that needs to be, the Bible records needs to be, the title page needs to be dated before the records, not afterwards. Marriage licenses, depending on how much the person who's filling out the information knows, can be good. Newspapers, usually the person who, if you're talking about obituaries and death records, it's usually the same person that does the obituary that did the death certificate. So that while they may be in agreement, that doesn't mean that they're correct. Passports, the person himself or herself is giving that information, so should be accurate to the best of his or her knowledge. Tax records and land records, while they're not very good for genealogical purposes, they can help you prove relationships. So I mentioned about birth information on the death certificate being a secondary source. Biographical information in an obituary. We had a friend of mine's mother-in-law's lost her husband recently, and he was a lawyer. And for 3 days, his obituary ran a totally different obituary every day that the family put in there, with some things that were probably pretty close to fiction. Information from other research. It's like playing telephone. Somebody will put something out on the internet, and then 10 more people will copy it, and all of a sudden it becomes, accurate. Well, maybe not. There are some very sloppy researchers out there. I mean, I've seen people who are dead still having children. And pictures of people, always look, if you're taking a picture from somebody else's family tree, always look to see who originally posted that picture on Ancestry. And Ancestry has a system where they show you that, because that person is likely to have it attached to the correct person. There are many people with the same names, so that picture sometimes gets attached to people who are not accurate. History, genealogy, or biographical books were very popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were written about the people who were active in the community, the best known people, and then they generally trace their family history in those books, so they can be very rich with information which may or may not be accurate. Some things that family stories that have been passed on over the years are secondary sources, and they may or may not be accurate. They may have been embellished over the years. I don't want you to be afraid of a secondary source, but I want you to use it as a starting point and then evaluate the sources that were used. And the best thing is if you could verify that information with at least 3 other primary sources, but maybe not, but not with somebody else's family tree. You need to examine it according to historical records that are accurate. So when you're evaluating sources, where did the information come from, if you can determine that? Who was the informant? I mentioned that about death certificates particular. But is there a reason to lie? Yes, there were lots of reasons why people lied on records. If you weren't old enough to get married and you did without your parents' permission and your parents were opposed, you might lie about your age so that you could get married. People who joined the military. There was a young man from Erie, Pennsylvania, or who lived in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was actually grew up in Canada, who joined in World War I as a 14-year-old in the Canadian Army, and his parents lived here. Well, he did too. And then when America joined the war effort, he uh, transferred over, and there was nobody checking ages then. And when he was sent overseas, the ship he was on was torpedoed, and he was 16 years old when he died in World War One. Immigration records. People lied, older, younger, whatever. In order to work, they may lie, advance their ages. Because they didn't want people to know how old they were. Sometimes they lied about their ages. In cases of crime and bigamy, they might be lying. Change their names or whatever. So there's all kinds of reasons why people might lie. Start with what you know. I hope you know a lot about yourself and your parents and your siblings. Places are as important as the names and dates, because that's going to help you prove relationships, because especially back in the old days, they couldn't travel far, so they had to have a way that they could connect. And if you've got somebody who lived in California marrying somebody who lived in Pennsylvania, how did they get together? You may have somebody with the same name in California that's not your Pennsylvania husband or wife. So start with the census records. You're going to start with the 1950 census. Now, still a little bit hard to search, although I've had some success on the National Archives site. It's not the traditional way of searching, or you're putting in a name, but it doesn't show up the way you're used to. So some people give up too soon on that. And any birth, marriage, or death records that you can have, and ask relatives. I'll give you a perfect story. I was working with a fellow from California who was a shirt tail relative, and his great grandparents had settled near, and I was able to take pictures for him, and cemetery pictures, and find records for him. But he had a grandparent who worked on the ship on Lake Erie, so he didn't always get in the census. And to make matters worse, his name was Henry Smith, and his wife's maiden name was Smith. You see where I'm going with this? We were having a devil of a time trying to sort out anything beyond who Henry Smith's parents might be. And he was talking to some of his relatives about his woes of trying to solve this problem. And one of them said, I have something rolled up in the attic. I don't even know what it is. Maybe it would help you out. So she got it out of the attic and gave it to Jeff. It was so big he had to go to Kinko's to have it scanned. It was the Smiths going back to the 1500s, names, dates, and places. A great, big, huge family tree. Sitting on it, she had no idea that, how valuable it was. Didn't even know what it was, been passed on from generation to generation, and she just luckily didn't throw it out. So knock on those doors for your relatives, because people may be sitting on pictures or documents or things that are going to be able to help you out. They have no interest in genealogy, but they may still have stuff. So to avoid mistakes, you want to verify those family stories. I've mentioned that the internet or print is not always reliable. You want to document the sources. Somebody's going to ask you later on, where'd you get that information? It's much more accurate, or you can prove your accuracy if you've got some sources that you got that from. And always look at the original document. Do not depend upon a transcription, because it may be totally screwed up. I do recommend that you put your family tree online. It'll help you to meet like-minded people, maybe relatives. If you do the DNA and you're looking for, you may find relatives you didn't know you had, maybe relatives you didn't even want to know you had, but it'll allow you to connect with family. It demonstrates that you're willing to share. So you're trying to get things from others, you need to be willing to give also. There are free sites and there are for fee sites. You can, even if you don't subscribe to Ancestry, you can put your family tree on there. MyHeritage, you can put your tree on, but they have a limit, I think, of 350 people. But you could do your direct line you didn't need to have siblings and, just the parents, grandparents on that way and get a good start to be able to connect with other people. The only thing I used to tell people that Wikipedia was not your friend. Now I'm changing. I say Wikipedia is not always your friend because there are some accurate things and they are trying to keep things more accurate there. But a wiki, by definition, is a cooperative effort. And on Family Search, all their trees are wikis. What this means is I can put my family tree on Family Search, and anybody else can make changes to it, add things, subtract things, whatever. Now, I don't know about you, but I can make my own mistakes without any trouble. I don't need help from anybody else. So I'm not interested in putting my tree anywhere that's a wiki. That's not the only wiki site. So just be careful where you're putting your tree. I wouldn't put my tree on a wiki. Why is the census important? You can determine the year of birth or close to the year of birth, although I will tell you that sometimes from census to census, that age doesn't progress 10 years, and it's not like 11 or 9 either. There'd be wacko. So you're going to have to try and figure out what's accurate. If you can get the closest census to the birth, it's probably going to be the most accurate. There is no 1890 census. There was one, but it was destroyed. And the story is that it was destroyed by fire. It was not destroyed by fire. It was destroyed by water when they tried to put out a fire there. And then they didn't know how to save records back in the day when that fire occurred. And so it sat in piles, in wet piles, and they couldn't separate it. And then for a while they had partial censuses. And then some bureaucrat in the 1830s decided it really wasn't fair for there to be censuses for some people and not for others. So by a stroke of the pen, they said, we need to destroy the censuses, the 1890 census. And that's what happened to it. There are still some scattered pieces remaining, but very few. It helps you to establish usually a birthplace. And some censuses ask for the parent's birthplace, so that can be helpful because it helps you determine that you've got the right Henry Brown by that information. It establishes family units. It helps to locate extended family, and in the cases of names that change over the years, there's an evolving spelling of the surname. Although remember, especially with an ethnic name, the person giving the information may not read or write and may not be able to spell a name, and the census taker may not be able to understand the name. And the census takers, they should have had a lot of people that were really anal about getting things right, taking census, but that was not always the case. So they could be sloppy. Did I mention that you should examine the original document? For those of you who are counting, we must be up to 4 at least. The federal census started in 1790 and it was taken every 10 years. Some states also had their own censuses. New York's are online, but some of them still are not online. The state census, Florida had census that's online. They're not all online, but some of them are. But you want to start with the 1950 census if you can find yourself or your parents or whatever who's going to be there. And then you follow individuals back census to census and merge the information and source it. And if you're using software, then it'll be attached to the person in the census. I mentioned that the original it may not be transcribed or indexed correctly. And if you're using software, it doesn't pick up every piece of information on the census. So there are valuable things on there or on any any of the documents. There is other information there that you want to look at. Plus, you want to look at the whole page or the couple pages before and couple pages after, because there may be in-laws on there. There may be neighbors. There may be a brother-in-law who lives in the household, and his information didn't get merged, or you may pick up a maiden name because a mother-in-law lives there, that kind of thing. It also gives you the exact date, the day, and the month, which can be helpful to you. Family Search is probably the biggest site that is totally free for genealogical records. It's the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. It's totally free. If you ever have an occasion to call them with a question, I have never called that I haven't gotten somebody on the phone who knows what he or she is, it's usually she, but not always, is talking about. Or if that person can't answer, we'll get back to you with somebody who can. They have improved their search engine, which used to be lousy, but you don't want to be too restrictive, because it'll search for everything that you put in there, and if all that information is not on the record, it may reject that as one of your one of the ones that it tells you is a match. So, and for instance, I was looking for my grandparents' wedding marriage record, and I knew the month and the year, and they lived in Pennsylvania, and they were married in 1903, so they weren't driving around to another state. That was unlikely. And I knew their names, and my grandfather's name was William Albert Bowser, and that's what I searched for. And I searched for the name of the wife, and I got Zip. And I was pretty sure that the Armstrong County records were online. So I didn't give up. I then searched, instead of my grandfather, for my grandmother, and her name was Desi Geiger. And the marriage license was issued to W.A. Bowser, which did not show up when I searched for William Albert. And I found it by searching for Desi. So try searching other ways if you don't get it the first time, if you're pretty sure a record is there. This site also has browsable resources, things that haven't been indexed yet but have been digitized. So you can search those records if you're willing to page through things. And then they have more resources at their family history centers or their family history libraries. And they are, just check on their website of where they are and then call them, because they're always open weird times. There's no consistent thing across the nation. Ours is open like Tuesdays and Thursdays in the evening, and they always have people there, volunteers to help you. And some of them are just kind people who haven't a clue, and other people can be very helpful. I was looking for some Swedish records, and they have a subscription to a Swedish resource that I wanted to see. And when I went to Erie, to the Family History Center, they didn't know what I was talking about, because we have a very, very small Swedish population here, and virtually nothing. I went up to Jamestown, New York, which is about 60 miles away, and they have a very large Swedish population there. When I walked in there to the Family History Center, they knew what I was talking about. They knew how to help me. They had a sheet that told, the words that meant son, daughter, those kinds of things. And I was on my way. This is how you access their browsable records. The green arrow is what the default is for the search, if you do a search on Family Search. But if you want to go to catalog, you have to use the search pull down, but you go to catalog. It's cumbersome for searching. I don't think I have it, no. Depends on, but you have to search by location. And I just searched by a county name and the name of the state. And then they give you a list of what they have, and you have to click on the list, and then the items under each topic are listed, and you have to click on those individually. So, and then they're not, even though you put for one of your parameters that you want online only, it still gives you things that aren't online that you have to go to a family history center for. But there's some good things there. Find a Grave is a great resource. It's a worldwide database that has over 210 million entries. It's done completely by volunteers. Like anything, there may be mistakes there. But it's nice if you want to, you have somebody that died out in Nebraska, and chances that you're ever going to get to Nebraska are slim and none. You can post a request for somebody buried out there in Nebraska, and a volunteer will go out and take a picture for you. So you can make corrections, you can link, family members. It's a great site. I just want to tell you though, this is where I talk about my great-grandfather. There's his tombstone. He was born in 1832. Yes, that's accurate. He died in 1907. Yes, we thought that was accurate. I had work that somebody did done in 1948 who screwed us up for life, I swear, who had him dying the end of the month of January in 1907. And the tombstone said so. Well, when the Pennsylvania released the death index, I paged through the 1907 death index, and must not be dead because he wasn't there. Now it was 1907 was early for Pennsylvania because they started keeping records in 1906, so maybe it wasn't there. But guess what? I remember I had that newspaper article my mother saved with no date on it. I found that he died January 3rd, 1908. I ultimately replaced the stone, and I did that for two reasons. One, because I wanted it to be accurate, but two, his wife had died in another county. She was in an unmarked grave, and I wanted to honor her also. I paid about half the price of what I paid for my parents' stone. The stone people will generally cut you a break if you're replacing an old stone or doing one for somebody who's been long dead. So if you're interested in doing that, always ask and negotiate. So Find a Grave can include birth dates, death dates, accurate or not. Sometimes people post obituaries. They have links to parents and siblings, spouses, children, and maybe a picture of the tombstone, and maybe a picture of the person. A new feature that they've added is the GPS, so you can actually post an actual GPS location for a grave, which can be very helpful for somebody who wants to go there. I will mention that there's a site where you can calculate the birth date from the years, months, days that are on a tombstone. That was very popular in the late 1800s, of just putting how old somebody was in years, months, and dates, and then you have to calculate the birth date. They didn't put it on there. This site still has family trees on it. They're linear, but nobody seems to be using it anymore. It's kind of archaic. So you may or may not find something there, but it does tell you how to contact the tree manager, and you may find something there. Cindy's List is like a great big library. It's a research portal. She doesn't have any documents herself on that, but she has links to sites, and she's got that categorized every which way by location, topic. It's all cross-referenced. It's great. When she first started out, she wanted to only have links to free sites. Now they're free and for pay sites. So but she does mark them what they are. And she does like to keep her site up to date. So if you find a dead link, she wants to know about it. Or if you find a new something she doesn't have, she'd like to know about that too. So I love this site. You have to remember that word "the," because there's another site called Ancestor Hunt, which does not have the good stuff that this one has. Everything on this site is free. You can see the broad range of things that they have, from newspapers to probates and wills. They don't have all these things on their site. They have links to the sites, but in addition to having um, those resources, they also have how to find things, or how to work with, how to, alternatives to obituaries, that kind of thing. So they've got a lot of instructional things on there too, and everything is totally free. And every day they get more and more stuff, and they have a mailing list that twice a month they'll send you an update of what they've added, so you can see if there's something that you are interested in. Passenger lists, immigration records, yes, they can be good. They actually started in the 1820s, but they're pretty sketchy. And it may only be the family unit with the, whoever was in charge listed. There's better information 1820 to 1893, but it's not all encompassing. It's not all there. So you may get a, record, you may not. Once Castle Garden got into the mix, then things got better. And 1893 is when Ellis Island came into the mix, and there was an entry for each person. And then from 1906 on, the ship manifest not only asked you where you were coming from in the old country, but the name of the person who would be your closest relative in the old country, and then where you were going in the new country, and if there was a relative or somebody you were going to, the name of that person. So that can be very rich in information. Unfortunately, the only person, or the only site that's indexing those other names from 1906 on, is MyHeritage. So it might be worth, they do have a 14-day free trial. It might be worth it if you're trying to track down ancestors, ethnic ancestors, to have a subscription, at least temporarily, to MyHeritage. They also have I guess I don't have it on here. They have a nice little video, I know I have it on your handout, that explains the process of how they index things, that'll, incentivize you to want to subscribe to MyHeritage. So Castle Garden was opened in 1855, but they didn't have the big long ship manifests at that time. So the closer you get to 1892, the better the ship manifests are. And remember that when you're looking at those ship manifests, what on any of your search engine, what shows up is only the first page with the name on it. These were big, wide books, and they were two pages across with the information. So be sure and look at the next page for more information, because it's got the rest of what was entered for these people. They used to, you have to have not a subscription. You have to register on those two sites to have your own account. It's totally free, but you can't see the documents unless you have an account. But they got lousy search engines. They used to be a lot better, because if you're searching for ethnic names, they may not be spelled correctly. And you may not know whether Maria came over as Mary or Maria. You can actually, there's a site called stevemorse.org. So when he advertises as a one-step search engine, you can search by sound X, you can search by part of a name. You can search by country. I don't like searching by country, and I'll tell you why. Because let's say your ancestor was German, and he came over on a ship, and there were a whole lot of Italian people that came with him. They used the ditto marks for country of origin, and if he stepped in line with those Italians, he might have gotten listed as Italian. So I do not generally include that on my search, but you can restrict by age, which is pretty good. Remember, if somebody was born or died on the ship, they are not listed in the front of the book on the manifest. They're listed at the back. So you need to look two places if there was it's more likely you're looking for somebody who was born rather than passed. So in addition to the immigration records, well, he has all kinds of ports of entry, and he does have links to Ancestry, which has, Galveston, San Francisco, and things that are for fee. He has the Social Security Death Index there, which is totally free. And he has some other searches too that you can do. The Social Security Death Index, I need to say a few words about that. It's free, but it's only been released through March of 2014. Nobody has it beyond that. Ancestry supposedly has it through March, everybody else through February. I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not, but you're talking a month. The index itself began in 1962. However, not everybody was entered in there, and the more complete records really started in the late 1980s. And the record is not, they have a place of death that people determine is the place of death. It's not. It's where the person's address of record is. So let's say I'm a snowbird and I go to Arizona in the winter, but my bank is here in Erie. And so their date for me, or place for me, would be Erie, Pennsylvania. But I died in January, and I was out in Arizona. So that's not accurate for placement. And the older records may have an inaccurate date of birth, primarily because people often didn't even know. In August of 1987, the Social Security Administration began a 3-state test pilot of enumeration at birth. And that meant that when you were born, you got a Social Security number. And because of taxes, parents wanted to do this because they had to have a Social Security number for a child in order to have him on their tax, to declare him as on their taxes. By the end of 1991, 45 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and New York City had signed agreements, and now over 90% of parents use that enumeration at birth. So pretty much everybody's getting into the Social Security system. If you're looking for a present day from 2000 forward obituary, this is the place to go. You want to do, it's legacy.com. Don't just do search obituaries, because it'll search, the default is the last 3 days. Well, if your person didn't just die, you're not going to find them. So you need to go to more options here, and then you get where you can, figure a date. As I mentioned, they only go to 2000. If you don't have any idea, obviously you can search all. And for those of you who have no life, you can sign up for an email alert for surnames, and you can get notified every time somebody of that surname dies. It's a cooperative venture of the funeral homes and the worldwide newspapers. And I don't know if they're still doing this, but at least initially, they were reducing the sizes of the old obituaries, and they were taking out the stuff you wanted to know, names of the parents, names of the siblings or wife, whatever. But they always included the name of the funeral home. And if a funeral home has digitized an obituary and put it online, they generally keep it up and it stays there forever. So with the funeral home name, you can get the obituary, or you can contact the funeral home and get the information from them. They're usually pretty good about helping you out. So where else could you find obituaries? Just doing a simple Google search with a name plus the word obituary can glean something for you. I mentioned library sites sometimes have indexes. Newspaper sites sometimes have public things that can be seen, obituaries without a subscription, and funeral homes. Once you find that some ancestor was buried in a certain funeral home, generally the whole family used that same funeral home. So that's a way that you can search records or talk to those people. Creative searching is going to help you out just in your whole genealogy pursuit. I always recommend when you're at a brick wall and you can't think of anything else, go to Google and see what you can find. Do a search for if you got a husband-wife combination that have names that are unique, then do the word genealogy plus husband-wife names. I use the plus sign. Google doesn't use the plus sign anymore, but I'm old school. I'm still putting it in. They just search the words, but it's okay. Do things, cemetery transcriptions plus a county and state name. There are advantages to using Google because there are people who are doing good genealogy work who are not on Ancestry, not on MyHeritage, not on your traditional websites. They may have a family website themselves, and you may miss it if you just stick to Ancestry. If you know anything about searching, if you use quotes, you're only going to get exactly what's inside those quotes. Most of the search engines are set up so that if people who are paid to have their names at the top come at the top and they're labeled as ads. That doesn't mean that it's a lousy site and it's not going to have the information. It's just be aware that the ads are going to come first. There are lots of newspaper sites, free sites out there. Google has newspapers, and what I like about the Google one is you can page through a newspaper and look at the whole thing if you have the date. The old newspapers didn't have a index on the front telling you what page to find things, nor did they have an obituary column that is plainly labeled as obituaries. And the old newspapers had very few pictures. And it's not that I want to see a lot of pictures, it's the fact that you're just looking at text. It's very hard to look at. In fact, if you're going to be sitting at your computer and doing newspapers for a long time, looking at newspapers, I recommend that you rotate your monitor 90 degrees, and then you can see a whole I can see a whole newspaper because I have a 27-inch monitor. I don't know what size you're working with. So it makes it so I can see a whole page at once. Chronicling America is the Library of Congress newspaper website, and they probably have the best index of all of these here. I mean, some of them are done with OCR software. They're not done by a human being. Family Search has a very nice wiki about newspapers, and they've got links in there by states. There's lots of states now have free sites, and I've got some of those listed in your handout. I do want to talk a little bit about Chronicling America. They say they have digitized newspapers from 1777 to 1963, but I will tell you that it's more likely you're only going to find them through 1925, that gets us back to things that are out of copyright. So the chances of finding a newer newspaper on Library of Congress is not good. One thing they have, though, you can look at the index to see what newspapers are available, because you don't want to search for something that's not there. They also have a directory that tells you what newspapers were printed, let's say if you searched for a certain place name, and then where to find the holdings and what those holdings are, whether they're microfilm, digitized, or actual paper. Archive.org, I mentioned how popular genealogical, biographical, and county history books and family histories were in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Archive.org has a gold mine of those. They're out of copyright. They have full text downloadable as a PDF. They also now have a lending library, which means that they do have some things that are still in copyright that you can borrow for like 2 weeks, and it goes poof on your computer when 2 weeks is up, so don't think you're going to be able to save it. They have family history books, they have county history books, they also have census records, and there's an organization called Reclaim the Records that has put some state indexes on there that they've gotten. I recommend that you get on the mailing list for subscription sites, not because I want to fill up your mailbox with your email box with lots of junk, but they will let you know when they have free access times or if they have discounts for new subscribers. And so you may be able to take advantage of a site for free. Most paid sites have some free parts where you could search or you can see an index. And look around and see what they offer. You can see what newspapers a newspaper site has. And if you're on the mailing list, like around Valentine's Day, they may have marriage records for free. Around Armistice Day, it might be military records. Newspapers.com just had a free, I think it was Mother's Day weekend, they had free. And DNA, if you want to buy DNA, they will let you know when they have a discount time. Facebook can be, you can find a lot of stuff on Facebook. There's place name groups, there's topic groups, there's genealogical and historical societies. If you're having trouble with your software or your website, there's users groups, there's sites to connect adoptees to the biological family, totally free, people that are working like crazy to help you out. There's a site to restore photos for you. It's a gold mine out there. I mentioned at the outset that our computer club helps us out. We have a group subscription to Ancestry. We have a genealogy special interest group. We have an all access subscription, which is the top of the line, includes the newspapers.com, but it also includes Fold 3, and that costs around $400. Added onto that, we have a subscription to Publishers Extra, which is the newspapers.com more recent stuff. And then because Pennsylvania has to get, a little slice of the dollar, it has tax on it. So it runs around $500. We currently have 25 users and it costs $20 a year. And why does it work? Well, some of our members just have a casual interest, and for $20 plus their computer users group dues, and ours are $24 a year, it's worth it to them. Most of our big users have their own US account for Ancestry, which is $199, and then they pay the extra $20 for the group membership. No one camps on it. We all know we have to sign out when we use it and how that works. There's a member user instruction sheet, and we have a member leader who happens to be me, who collects the money, handles the paperwork, and it's a pain in the neck because I got to make sure that people renew their memberships and the whole 9 yards. But it works, and it's a deal. Just bonus information, if you want to learn more about anything related to genealogy, there's this wonderful site called conferencekeeper.org, and they have a calendar, and they share information about conferences, Zoom sessions, events, contests, volunteer opportunities, all kinds of stuff. And they'll send you an email once a week to remind you to look at the calendar and tell you what's coming up. And through our library, I've been doing, for about 5 years, been doing a once a month class, and that has hit Conference Keeper, and I generally get people from all over the United States attending my classes. Not that I'm so good, but they're interested in the topic. So I just my parting shot is genealogy without documentation is mythology. And I will stop sharing. Why does that say new share? Nope. Oh, share, duh. Okay. I haven't been monitoring the chat, but I see there's 2 things in there. Does somebody have a question? Oh,
Monitoring chat. There's no questions right now.
the handouts are all hyperlinked sites, so there's no point in printing out the handouts. They're good for digital. Question?
May I? Hold on, I gotta get my headset out. I'm hearing an echo. Okay, let's see if that's better. I did put the handouts in chat for those on Zoom. And for everybody here and on Zoom, the handouts are actually emailed to you right now. There's a bunch of hyperlinks, so if you print them out, they may not be as useful. So save a tree, don't print it, and just click it.
Question?
Yep, go ahead.
Sue, you mentioned early somewhere that obituaries seem to be getting away from the birth dates. My mom lived to be 96 and she just passed away 2 years ago. And as we were preparing for her death, I looked at previous papers in the small town. And yes, they were all eliminated, but the death date was of course there. Well, what is the thinking about not putting it in?
Privacy issues, identity theft.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna, it's no 40-year-old's gonna try and pass himself off as a 96-year-old woman, but, younger people passing away. I think that's it. It used to be that obituaries, the newspaper wrote the obituaries, and they had a canned thing that they asked for that the funeral homes provided for them, and it was, the names of the parents, the siblings, the survivors, the previous, that kind of stuff. But now people write their own obituaries.
Yeah.
Some of them want to save money and have as few words as possible because they're playing by the inch. And some people just don't think that's important. I personally have written my own obituary, and I want it to be right. So don't have the death date yet.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
She did a great job.
The response was no, you did a great job, if you didn't hear it.
I will warn you once again that it's a very addictive hobby, and I hope you have a spouse that is willing to have you have your nose in a computer constantly.
Question, statement. Sue, you didn't add it in your talk, but in my research, my dad's side came from England, my mom's from Russia side, so we can't do much there. But the England, I have followed the census, and my dad's father came from England. So I went to the British census records, and sure enough, I found there's a lot of Thomas Tweedles, but there's not too many that have his parents' name, Joseph and Adelaide, Birkenhead, England, and I went back a multiple of 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, and found out all about my grandfather's. My grandfather passed away in the 30s, but I'm learning a lot about him and his siblings of 15 kids in that family, and it's quite interesting, checking the British records.
The British records are good. I will tell you that I had some trepidation. I've been working on, I mentioned about the Swedish. The Swedish used a patronymic, well, most Scandinavian countries did. In the 1800s, they used a patronymic naming system, which means that if your father's name was John, let's say his name was John Hansen, then you were John, if you were a male, your last name was Johnson. But if you were a female, your last name was John's daughter. Now, that means that brothers and sisters did not have the same surname. You did not have the same surname as your father. And I started to get into some Swedish records, and here's what I discovered. Instead of it being very difficult, it was very easy, because every census record had a complete birth date for every family member. So I had a complete birth date for people who had come to the United States. And when I first started, I remember my friend's name is Hansen, the one I'm doing the research for. And I had his father's marriage record, and his father's last name was Johnson. So I wrote that, and I wrote sick after it because it made no sense to me till I learned about the naming system. But having his birth date and his brother's exact birth date, I could find the records in Sweden, and I actually went back into the 1600s with those records. And I will tell, the women did not take the husband's name when they married, which makes it, and if you were illegitimate, that carried on the census every time it was on the census for life. And that allowed me to, I met somebody online who was doing Swedish records who had a puzzle, who was a sister of the illegitimate great-grandmother of my friend. Both illegitimate. Larson, Lars daughter, I think was a surname. Yeah. So it wasn't, as hard as I thought it was going to be. And I don't know how the other, Scandinavian countries are. That's the only one I've searched extensively.
Okay. Are we ready for the raffle? Or the door prize?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. John,
Thank you.
We should stop the recording first, probably, or not.
Yeah.